Our top focus in this edition, Saudi Arabia has failed in its bid to become a member of the United Nations Human Rights Council. China, Russia and Pakistan were elected members for the next 3 years. And this election raised a serious question once again among experts and human rights activists. Should rights violators be elected to the council at all? 15 positions were up for elections in the 47-seat human rights regulatory body. Pakistan and Cuba were among the controversial winners, along with China and Russia. Russia and Cuba ran unopposed in the UN General Assembly election. Saudi Arabia and China vied for membership in a 5-nation race for 4 spots, with Pakistan, Uzbekistan and Nepal. Candidates were elected by a secret ballot in geographical groups to ensure even representation. China received 139 votes in their secret ballot, a dramatic fall from the 180 votes that it received in 2016. Pakistan received 169 votes, while Uzbekistan got 164 votes. Saudi Arabia got the least number of votes of them all, 90 votes. Riyadh's bid to be on the Human Rights Council's board came to an end. China and Russia have been globally criticized for their human rights violations. Human Rights Watch has described China and Saudi Arabia as 2 of the world's most abusive governments, quote unquote. Israel's ambassador to the UN condemned the election of Russia and China to the UNHRC. Listen in.
Today's Human Rights Council elections prove once again that this council has nothing to do with protecting human rights and everything to do with violating them.
The group called Russia's election problematic, pointing out the numerous war crimes that the country carried out in the Syrian war. Russia has also been recently accused of using military-grade nerve agent to poison opposition leader Alexei Navalny. China is facing global criticism over its persecution of the Uyghurs. Reports suggest that over the last few years, the Xi Jinping government has detained over 1 million Uyghurs. The state calls these detention centers re-education camps. The Chinese government has been accused of running a forced sterilization campaign against Uyghur women recently, and still it gets elected to the Human Rights Council. Last year, Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan had pledged to make social justice a priority after taking office, but his government ended up increasing restrictions on the media, the political opposition and the non-governmental organizations. Pakistan and terrorism stand synonymous in front of the global society. Thousands of Pakistani civilians have been killed by extremist groups operating with impunity under the Pakistan government. Women, minorities and transgender people continue to face violence, discrimination and persecution in the country. The Taliban, Al-Qaeda and various other groups are behind the increasing militancy in Kashmir, claiming hundreds of lives every year. It should be noted that Pakistan is currently grey-listed by the Financial Action Task Force. The vote showed Saudi Arabia's questionable image amongst the international community members as well. When it comes to its own human rights record, critics have condemned Riyadh's human rights violations for a long time now. In recent years, Saudi authorities have rounded up hundreds of perceived political opponents, detained more than a dozen women's rights activists, and carried out mass prisoner executions. Public protests, political parties and labor unions. Political parties have also been banned. The latest hit to its global image was the murder of the Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Khashoggi, remember, was allegedly murdered by Saudi agents in Turkey 2 years ago. Since then, evidence has emerged linking the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, to that murder. Human rights organizations the world over have been raising their voice for an investigation since the year 2018. The controversial voting system sees countries strike bargains to agree on who will stand, often unopposed. President Donald Trump pulled the United States out of the council in 2018. The Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, in his statement said, and I'm quoting now, "The body allows the election of the world's worst human rights abusers to seats on the council." Joining us on the broadcast this minute is Strategic Affairs expert Harsh V. Pant. Thanks very much for speaking with us. Let me begin by asking you, to what extent is this a surprise? Saudi Arabia has failed in its bid to become a member of the Council, but Pakistan, Russia, China managing to grab those seats. Should rights violators find a place on the Human Rights Council at all has been a question that has been raised for the longest time.
Absolutely. This is a long-standing question, and I think it's ironical that it comes in a year when UN is celebrating its 75th anniversary, and there are serious questions about the viability of the United Nations per se. So when you have a body like UNHRC demonstrating once again that it has no will to reform itself, it has no will to, get back to the core of its central ethos, in a sense, by bringing in such members as such countries as members, you have to just, at some point, you have to just say that countries increasingly, those countries who have a stake will be giving up even more of their hopes and will not rely on UNHRC as the embodiment of an institution that is meant to protect human rights across the world. If you have countries like China, Pakistan, you have Cuba, Russia on the other hand. I mean, these countries are institutional states which defy the norm of human rights. The state capacity is wielded in a manner in these countries where human rights do not have any existence. So to have these countries as continuing members, in some cases like China, and by bringing in countries like Cuba, Russia, and Pakistan on board, it seems that it has become such a big farce that you just don't. I don't think countries like India should be taking anything that comes out of UNHRC seriously.
Right, delving deeper into the point that you just made, international community raising their voice when it comes to rights violations. For example, as recently as just last month, the rights violations taking place targeting the members of the Uyghur community in China's Xinjiang region, multiple reports on that front as well. But on the other hand, electing China to the Human Rights Council, Pakistan, Russia, Cuba, all of these, like I said, are countries that have allegations and have been called rights violators. So to what extent do we even expect the UNHRC to deliver justice when it comes to issues of international significance and matters as sensitive as human rights violations?
I don't think we should have any expectation at all. And I think, when you say allegations, these are not simply allegations. These are well-documented facts.
Yes.
The way China has systematically, dealt with its minorities by incarcerating and even doing things in Xinjiang which you can't even speak about. There are unspeakable crimes against humanity that are being done across minorities in China, in Pakistan, and you have institutionalization of that anti-human rights mindset in these states, to bring those countries as members again and again and again, despite this debate raging fiercely amongst human rights groups, among states that care about human rights, that this is something that is not sustainable. And when you have America withdrawing from Human Rights Council, it was a very important signal, and I think Trump administration talked about it. Mike Pompeo even talked about it in his statement, that in some ways it's vindication for Mr. Trump that he alluded to this fact that unless reforms are made, they will walk out. They have walked out. They will not come back. And now that once again UNHRC seems to have been reconfirming that they have no intention of reforming and therefore bringing their own credibility down so many notches, that I think for nations that often look at UN bodies for maintaining global norms should not have any expectation at all that whether it is UNHRC or other bodies like, for example, what WHO did in the initial stages of coronavirus, that we should expect anything concrete from these organizations. And therefore, I think the state of multilateralism today around the world is at such a state. And there's a good reason for that. And the reason is the behavior of these bodies.
All right, we're going to leave it there for the moment. Harsh V. Pant, appreciate very much for joining us on the broadcast with those perspectives.